thank you so much for your time today. It's wonderful to have a chance to talk to you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim.
So you are the CEO of Tabletop Tycoon, which incorporates a lot of sub-brands. Tell me about that. How did it all come about? It's been around since the mid-90s, right?
Yeah, so actually, well, right at the end of the 90s, I guess, we're back when Y2K was the thing. So 1999 is when we officially started the company back then. And we were actually we did local events, then we did online retail, and then we did local retail. And we went through a lot of iterations. We had a lot of growth over the years. And then really our publishing, Tabletop Tycoon officially started back in 2015. And that was after we'd been doing some stuff through publishing, titles like Alien Frontiers, and we'd kind of gone through a bunch of iterations of publishing house stuff. And that's when we officially sort of incorporated to say, okay, we're got a bunch of different kind of imprints. And we went through a bunch of iterations of that. And then probably around, I guess it was 2019 is when we kind of came to where we are right now as far as the type of publishing that we do. So we have Tabletop Tycoon, which is used to have other elements of that. We used to have a logistics division, a wholesale division, a retail piece, and all that. And now we're primarily a publisher. So we just make games. So we make stuff like Everdell, Alien Frontiers, Nemo's War, all sorts of different stuff. We make Polyhero dice. So the imprints, those brands, we have Starling Games, which makes very kind of evocative games like Everdell and Alien Frontiers. We have things like Victory Point Games, makes more historical type games, which we're actually doing a lot of remasters for. We acquired them back in 2018, and they do Nemo's War and a bunch of other stuff, Dawn of the Zeds, and a whole bunch of cool stuff, Twilight of the Gods. And then we've got Flying Meeple, which is our kids and family brand. So I have 3 boys, 11, 7, and 5. And so those are games for more young kids and families. Sort of ages 3 plus, mostly 4, 5, and up. And then with Sparkworks is more what I call like bookshop games. So that's stuff like Blind Spot that we do, the Princess Bride games based on the movies. So those are things that you would more see like in a Barnes & Noble here in the US. And then we have Polyhero dice, which is an accessory line. And these are really awesome shaped dice done by Dan and Greg May out of Australia. And we've done them since 2015, actually. So there's a lot of elements of that, but primarily we're a publisher, right? Just like there's Lucky Duck Games and Lucky Duck Kids, they've got kind of 2 imprints. Asmodee has 1 million imprints, so we're just like a tiny epic Asmodee. That's kind of my pitch.
Nice. So you've got the different sub brands. Is that like you said? So you've got a clear picture for what type of game plays within each. Have you done that so it's clear for the consumer? What was the reason for the sub brands?
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, a lot of that is more wholesale than consumer. I tend to think customers just think of it by game. So if you said like, hey, Ticket to Ride, do you know that game? And probably 95% of the people that know Ticket to Ride as a game wouldn't know who the publisher is. They just wouldn't think about it. And, probably not that many people would actually know the designer or their artist or any of that stuff, right? That's more like a geek thing that we pay attention to. Obviously, there's all those credits right on the box and the rules, but people really think of the brand as like the game. So a lot of this is for background. It's like, okay, if you are Barnes & Noble and we're selling a bunch of bookstore type games to you, it's a certain price point, it's a certain thematic approach, it's a certain complexity level. And so having a catalog where we had, let's say, Elaminis, which is a very light kids game, next to Alien Frontiers, which is a 14 plus very heavy Euro game, it's not undoable. Like a lot of publishers have this scenario, right? And they try and sort of figure out how to wrangle that. So if you look at the Pandasaurus catalog or even like the Fantasy Flight catalog back in the day, they split out its Fantasy Flight toys and they had, hey, that's my fish. And it ends up being more like, these are the games we want to make. And then we're like, okay, where does that fit within the sort of brand imprint? And you'll see a similar thing in publishing, right? Scholastic might have, I don't know if I'm using the right terms here, but like Scholastic might have like rock and they do like fantasy and sci-fi, that sort of thing. So that's kind of how we think of it. We are one publisher, Tabletop Tycoon, and we have these different imprints, which are convenient labels effectively to say, hey, this is the type of game that we make, both for consumers and by extension of that, because consumers tend to shop in different places. You go, oh, this type of consumer that we're targeting with this game, that we think they would like it, that's going to fit more in the Sparkworks line, or that's going to fit more in the Victory Point line.
Yeah, that makes sense. I see what you're saying, but I think there's a lot of gamers in the industry who do follow the brand of the publishers. It probably is something like 95.5. You're probably right, but
well, I'd say certainly if you're using like Board Game Geek, it's probably, I don't know, over half, right? Like I would think that's like dedicated users, right? That say like, hey, yeah, I follow, and that's where the imprint brands are useful, right? Or the publisher brands. So if I follow Renegade Games, I'm like, oh, cool, I like Renegade Games. So maybe I like their more family games or their strategy lines or their RPGs. but I know it's Renegade overall makes all these things. But then if I just like, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, or I think it's just called Power Rangers now, the game, then that is, that I follow that line. I know Renegade makes it, but like I'm following that. And if they came out with another, related game that was that type of game, maybe I follow that. So they're definitely useful. It's just the imprint levels are more useful to aficionados, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think with the success of some of your games, Everdell, for example, that makes the Starling brands well known within the board game community. But the Tabletop Tycoon brand doesn't seem to be something that you talk about. For example, it's not on the box. You don't see it prominently labeled there or anything. So is that a conscious decision that is more of a business brand for you, talking to the distributors and the retailers?
Yeah, and I think you'll start to see that. We have started putting Tabletop Tycoon, it's on the back of the box, and it'll say like, that's our address and everything. So we're not really hiding that that's part of it. It's just from a forward-facing standpoint. If you're looking at it on a shelf, you'd want to see, hey, let's say there's a Tabletop Tycoon section in the store. It's going to be like, here's the Starling games, you want all those together. Here's the Victory Point games, you want all those together. And maybe the Flying Meeple stuff's in a different category of the store, or Sparkworks is in a totally different store, or Polyhero is going to be with the accessories, with the dice. So they're different brands for different purposes. But you will start to see that Tabletop Tycoon be a little more consistently put on there. Like you'll see our logo typically just on the back of the box, because the imprint logo is kind of more what people would front of mind as far as the fans of that type of game. That's what you want them seeing up front.
Yeah, that makes sense. So going back to Alien Frontiers, one of the games you mentioned a few times there, that game's got quite an interesting place in Kickstarter board game history for what it did there.
Yeah, so just for context, that we actually acquired Clever Mojo Games, who made Alien Frontiers first. So David McKenzie, who did Alien Frontiers on Kickstarter, we were just operating as a store at that point, and we were like, hey, we're going to buy. We knew this game Alien Frontiers was really good, and we were going to buy a bunch of stuff. We're just a local shop, and we were like, hey, we're going to buy like 100 copies of this game we had 2 stores at the time, so for our 2 stores. And they were like, who are you? Like, why are you buying so many of these games? We're like, well, we heard it's really good, and we sell a lot of games, so we really want to push this one. And it was a limited, game. And so we actually contacted them on, I think it was the first run, and they did another run, and it was literally like, oh, this was after the Kickstarter, and they were like, oh yeah, I actually don't have room in my garage for this. Like I can't fit it all in my container. So we had a warehouse at the time, and so we said, oh yeah, we can do that for you. So we received the container. We had a tiny little 800 square foot warehouse at the time, and we received that, and then we started doing more sales and marketing and stuff, and that led into a lot of broader distribution and logistics and fulfillment and all that sort of thing. So now flash forward to a few years later, we acquired Clever Mojo, and we had Alien Frontiers and King's Forge and a bunch of other lines that were with that. So Alien Frontiers, when it jumped in, I've done, according to Kickstarter, I've done more successful Kickstarters than anyone else on the planet. But Alien Frontiers was really one of the first ones that you looked at and you were like, wow, that's really cool. And so I was involved in that from the get-go. A lot of our early clients were like, when, I don't know, Eminent Domain from Tasty Minstrel did $40-something thousand, and we were like, that's crazy that you could get $40,000. Alien Frontiers was like, I don't know, 13,000 or something, but it was a huge amount at the time. And so we had a whole kind of history of, we made our own little crowdfunding platform. We did our own pledge managers before pledge managers existed, using Shopify stores, and all this different stuff. So we really grew up as a kind of publisher and as a platform with that industry, primarily on the service side, helping publishers. And so then we incorporated that lesson into a lot of what we did. So if you take something like Black Orchestra, so another game that we made kind of from the ground up, and we just did a pre-order for that originally. So Kickstarter existed, this was 2014 or something, but we just did blackorchestra.com. We had this kind of like email campaign where you could sign up for like updates from the conspiracy, and you're signing up, and it was a fun thing. And we got enough pre-orders, and then we said, okay, great, we'll make this game. We released it. It did well, got good reviews, and then we went to Kickstarter again, and we said, hey, now we're going to do another print run, because you don't know how much you need to make, and we've done a little expansion pack of conspirators for that as well. Mm-hmm. So Alien Frontiers really serves as this, stalwart, bookmark, so to speak, and we've done, 5 or 6 campaigns over the years, many campaigns for it. We did Rocket Dice, we did, we were on the 5th edition now, which has had probably 8 printings, so don't get me started on the differences between those. We did a big box, we did a whole bunch of stuff. And we probably will have another edition of Alien Frontiers coming up now, because I think we're on going on the 11th anniversary, something like that.
Wow.
So it was a early, and I love games like Kingsburg, which Alien Frontiers, for folks who aren't familiar, is a dice roll and place game. So you roll and then you kind of place those like a worker placement game, but with dice. And where you can place it depends on what you rolled on the dice.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an early. There's tons of those games now, but there weren't that many back then. So that was the kind of innovative piece of it. And it's still a great game today. We still play it a ton, still sells steadily. But that was very much a Kickstarter scion. You know, we kept pushing the envelope on the latest Alien Frontiers campaign. We'd try and do that. Now it's largely, most of the big campaigns are either party games with huge audiences that come to it from, you know, like a web comic or something, or it's you know, heavy miniatures games. Like that's all the top funded ones. But Kickstarter still is, you know, doing very well. And a lot of publishers kind of go through Kickstarter and then they move beyond Kickstarter, and a lot of publishers just kind of live on Kickstarter. So it's a very interesting platform, and Alien Frontiers has been there for that whole time, that whole, like, you know, 10 years or whatever it's been now. So
yeah, absolutely. So talking about the evolution, obviously Everdell got 1 or 2 backers in its time on Kickstarter.
yeah.
How was that process? It must have been incredible to watch. I mean, with the expansions recently, I'd imagine, I was speaking to some of your colleagues earlier in the year, and they've said, whoa, that was just crazy. We didn't expect anything of that sort. It must be amazing.
Yeah, no, we're very blessed and appreciative of all the fans, and obviously our team works hard to put together a good product. In this case, many products in that latest campaign, which we internally refer to as Mist Leaf, because it's New Leaf, Mistwood, and the complete collection. But that's a mouthful. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously Everdell did very well. Their initial campaign did way better than any campaigns we'd had at that time. And then we've had other, you know, expansions since then. We had 2 other campaigns in the interstitial, and then this latest campaign just blew up, and, you know, way beyond what we had anticipated. So that's great. We barely missed the like top 10. I think we were like number 16, but we missed like the top 10. But I think we are still the number 1 funded like kind of Euro game overall. So I'll take that as a badge of pride. But really, it's, you know, we got a ton of backers. We're working hard on getting all that stuff done. We've got a lot of work to do. You know, it's scheduled to deliver in March of 2022, and that's, you know, we're still on track so far, knock on wood. But with all the production delays and shipping delays and everything, we've got to keep our nose to the grindstone there. So we're working on all that stuff. But so it's always good. You're appreciative of that. But like when you're doing it in the moment, the number of emails and messages and comments is like overwhelming. And then of course that continues, right? It doesn't stop when the campaign ends. You still got to keep people up to date. So we do updates once a month, kind of show people what we have, work with our factories every day, every week, work with the illustrators, graphic designers, everybody that does all this different stuff. And we have to do that for all of these products, including the stuff we unlocked during the campaign, including the lore book. And I think there's six products total, like major products in there. I might be missing one. There might be like 7, but we did the card sleeves, we did the resource vessels, which were very popular. And so you can still get those through our pledge manager. So if you go to the Kickstarter, it'll link to the pledge manager, and that's going to be open for many months more until we get to the point where we will let people know. I think it's 2 weeks in advance before we close it. But basically, we keep that open to kind of keep securing orders and let people get in on that deal until we get closer. So that's the other piece that happens on Kickstarter a lot since the advent of pledge managers, is that it has a continued life kind of after the campaign ends, and then people can keep jumping into it. So yes, we're very, very lucky and appreciative of everybody that participated in that campaign, and that line's done very well for us. So we are full bore on Everdell. That's our main focus these days, and we've got obviously a lot of other projects that we're working on as well. So coming back out of quarantine, we just moved into our new offices back in November, and we've been working remotely for most of, you know, year and a half, I guess. And now we're starting to come back as conditions are improving and vaccinations are more available. We're starting to come back in the office. And so a lot of the stuff that we delayed, you know, in-person development and that sort of stuff for titles, that's much harder for us to do remotely, especially with certain types of games. You know, we essentially make games to play around a table face to face with people. So when you're like, hey, you should do that digitally, and it's like, you can technically, but it's not quite the same experience. And a lot of ways it's just less efficient. So that's kind of where we're at. So that's kind of the story of Everdell. It started in, I guess, 2017, 2018. I want to say 2018. And it's obviously done very well ever since. So we did, I think about once every, you know, 12 to 18 months, we had another campaign in there. And then this most recent one in 2021 did phenomenally.
How did that game come to your attention in the first place? What was the initial contact for you and the game and working with James, the designer?
Yeah, so James and Clarissa designed that one over many years, and there's a bunch of design diaries on BGG if people want to see those. But they just submitted it to us through our submissions form. This was back in 2016, 2017, something like that. And then we would have evaluated at our we do like a company retreat, so we evaluate all the titles, and we picked a few of them, and it was just kind of themed as like a Renaissance or a fantasy city, sort of a Renaissance-ish city, I think. And then obviously our team did a lot of the theming and work through development with James, and primarily James was doing that at that point. And so that was a lot of work over probably a year and a half, 2 years. And then obviously Andrew Bosley did the artwork for the base game and all the expansions he's done so far. And so that was a process as well. And it all came together great. So it was a lot of work. It was a very brief summary and dozens of people working on all that stuff. But yeah, kind of the same way that any other game comes to us, right? And so that's the other challenge of game publishing is people always like to look at, oh, this was a big hit or this is really well regarded, and oh, but this other game that you did, that's not as good. And it's not necessarily true. Like, first of all, you don't know that when you make the game. You always like try to make a really good game. The question is just how is it going to resonate with the audience? And so you try and take those lessons from what you learned and make the better games. But you've seen every publisher in existence do this, right? If this was an easy thing to do, then everybody be doing it all the time, right? So it doesn't matter how big a company you are, or how small a company, it's still a really hard thing to do to get that. And you're very lucky. It requires a lot of hard work from everybody on the team and a lot of luck. And so you have to have both those things. Like very rarely do you get, I guess you do get people who get lucky, but then they don't capitalize on that because they're not willing to work hard or they're not able to work hard. So it really is the combination of those things. And it's a lot of efforts from a lot of different people, right? So it's from our staff, it's from the designers, the developers, the graphic designers, the printers, the shipping people, like it's everybody, right, that brings that together. So I always like to kind of reflect that when we're talking about the success of a game. Failed games are actually easier in a lot of ways, right? Comes out, people are like, yeah, it's okay. That's usually all you get, right? They're like, it's fine. We're like, that's not for me. And just you got to listen to the market. You got to listen to, are people willing to exchange their hard-earned money for that thing? And if so, then they're telling you, hey, I think this is worthwhile. You built a good product, which is different than building a good game. There can be lots of good games that are too expensive or too kind of complicated. Like maybe the gameplay is really good, but it takes 3 hours to get into. And then you're also dealing with a kind of flowing stream, which is the market, which is a game that came out 10 years ago is not the same game that people would want today, right? That's a very different expectations. Probably the most notable one that everybody can relate to is time commitments. So it used to be back, let's say 20 years ago, we were much more forgiving of games that had a lot of setup or were a little more clunky or took longer to get into. There just weren't as many options that we were aware of at the time. It's not to say there weren't a ton of options. It's just, yeah, we're going to play Catan. Like that was it, right? You play, we're going to play Carcassonne. There's like a few new games a year because we started getting into board games back in the kind of Euro invasion, early 2000s. And that's when that really started picking up. But now there's so many games coming out all the time that you have to differentiate. And one of those ways is more approachable, shorter play times. And so that's something we keep in mind as we look at new games, as we develop games. And we make games of all different lengths. Like some of our stuff is 3-4 hours, right? If you go to the heavier end, and some of our stuff is 5 minutes. So like literally, I Hate to Kill You, which is a Princess Bride dice game, is 7 minutes because it's 7 rounds and each one takes about a minute. So it's all about finding the right mix of attributes for the people that are playing the game. That's the key piece.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Everdell, there's lots of reasons why that game's done so well. So I don't want to belittle it by phrasing like this. But if we're being sort of blunt on a business perspective, Animeeples with beautiful art by Andrew Bosley certainly doesn't hurt it, does it? And it kind of creates a craze for getting just beautiful art and chucking some Animeeples and you've got a good game. And that seemed to be a phase for 2-3 years. What do you think is the next one? Do you sit there and sort of analyze the business side of it and think, okay, where's the game going? Where's the game market going? We had rolling rights for a bit, didn't we? What do you think the next thing is going to be that gets everyone crazy?
Yeah, I mean, that's the exciting part is you don't know, right? And so like right now, we're honestly so busy with what we're doing right now. We're actually not accepting additional submissions or really looking at that. We have enough stuff that we'd already signed that was mostly delayed during the pandemic. And so we've kind of said like, we need to put a pause on that and put these out. So that part of my brain has sort of turned off a little bit because it doesn't really do me much good to like look for it. I think it's going to be constructible sandwich games. Like that's going to be the new thing. And then it becomes, that's not what it is. Because by the time I would make that, if I think that now, it might be 2 years before that game comes out. And that's the other ironic thing, is that you'll see in the market people like, oh, all these people are jumping on this bandwagon. Well, like, realistically, those people probably started on that bandwagon, a year and a half ago. And then they finally got everything done. And it just happens they, had an idea at this really close to the same time, and it comes out. So I think the way to think of it is like, the window dressing gets people in the door, right? So if it's, hey, this looks really good, then the mechanics, the gameplay itself, and the component quality to a degree, and how sort of supported the game is, but how it plays really matters for longevity. The game looks really pretty, you play it, you're like, this is garbage. You're not going to tell your friends, hey, I played this really pretty game that's garbage, you should buy it. People are going to go, it looks pretty, but you shouldn't buy that. So that's the balancing act. And we always try and do, nice presentation, which is different depending on the type of game you're doing, type of audience, expectations. But that's been something we always try and make it, look really good from our perspective. And then the gameplay has to carry it through. And that's not a particular type of gameplay. Again, it goes to the audience. So if you're saying like, I'm going to build a party game, what's going to differentiate this party game from all the other party games on the market? What's the hook? What's the thing that's from a theme or mechanic, or maybe there's no party games for exactly 7 people or whatever it is, right? And you're like, I'm going to target that thing. So yes, when we get back in that mode of more prospecting and designing and developing in-house, then we start to do that more, but we have to look at a very short timeline. And so right now we've kind of paused that for a little bit, because we've got to clear our backlog, and then we can kind of go back to that more exciting part, which is what's the next thing going to be? Right now we just know what the next thing is going to be, but we kind of took a year, off to focus on what we already had. So luckily we were very fortunate to do well during this pandemic. As far as the company overall, we were actually able to hire more people and expand. And so the industry as a whole saw some growth because of the type of thing that people stuck at home. Hey, I need these games to come home and play with them. So we were very fortunate that way, and we're just looking forward to building that the next thing. But it's a very frontless driven industry. And that's the exciting part. You always want to be, peering into the future and saying, what about this? And then the exciting part is not doing that. The exciting part is you had an idea, you came up with a concept, you go, make this thing, bring this thing to life, then put it out there. And then most of the time, 9 times out of 10, even for successful publishers, they're like, it's okay. That's it. That's all you get. And you're like, oh, okay, well, we made some games. People, some people really love them, right? Some games, we might have games that sell very badly for us, which might sell very well for another publisher, but like, for us, relative to what we expect from sales, we might be like, oh, this is a failure, this is a horrible game. But there might be like 300 people that love that game. It's their favorite game, right? And so like you've done something good for that. And that's where we do a lot of giving as well. So we want to make every game, our tagline is kind of making the world better one game at a time, because we do a lot of donations to Toys for Tots, which is a charity here in the US, run by a division of the US Marine Corps that donates games to kids who don't have Christmas presents. And so that's something that like I used to get games from Toys for Tots when I was a kid. So our goal is like have a system. We make games, we get them out to people, hopefully people enjoy them. And then we sort of use that. Like we donate for every game that we sell through our web stores and stuff we donate a game to Toys for Tots. So worst case, we're like, hey, we're still generating some good from this. We're getting good fun times with people that bought the game. Sure, we might not, not every game is going to be a hit. In fact, most games are not going to be a hit. But when you get those hits, you just have to kind of shepherd them well. That's the goal. So that's where a lot of our focus is for the lines that have done well, like Nemo's War. We have the Ultimate Edition and the Journey's End expansion. We've got Everdell, all the expansion stuff. We're kind of capstoning that line as it stands, and then we'll explore more in the world of Everdell with other standalone games. Polyhero, we're doing a big reprint of the whole line to get all 4 classes back in print. So that's a lot of what we've been focused on over these last like year and a half, 2 years, because that's all stuff we could do without having to do a lot of the development stuff that was harder for us to do or less fun for us to do, honestly, if we weren't in face-to-face.
Yeah, makes sense. So you talked a bit about the giving back. You also do the board game booster boxes, which seems to be a massive contributor towards that, which has so many different publishers involved in that. How did that come about? It seems to be such an amazing collaboration of so many businesses.
Yeah, so that was a fun thing. So again, that was actually our first, what we call a benefit product. So we didn't used to do the donation for every game we sold. We had a warehouse at the time. We had a bunch of products there. We were like, we were going to PAX East, which is a local show for us in Boston. We're in New Hampshire. And so we were like, hey, I want to go. This is one of my crazy ideas. And I'm like, all right, what if we took, like my kids always open blind boxes, right? So my kids would have been like, I don't know, oldest would have been 7 at that time. And they're always watching these opening videos. It's a whatever blind box thing. And I was like, what if you had that but for board games? And what if you could offer a really good deal for it? And so we got a bunch of publishers to donate games. And so they get kind of exposure is the benefit to them. And this actually does work. It seems silly, but like people go, oh, wow, I'd never found this game before. Because the people that primarily bought board game booster boxes initially were people that were like, I might like board games. I don't know, but like, I don't want to like invest $60 in a game. So I think at the time they're $50 now. They might go up to 60. The price changes depending on like cost of what's inside and all that stuff. But I think originally they were like $40. So you got like 3 games, I think, in the original version for $40. Then you got the newer ones were $50 for 4 games, and they're all different games. So you're not going to get a repeat in the same box. And then we had a huge variety of games. So we would get them from clients at the time that we were doing logistics for, distribution. We would donate a bunch of our games that we published, and then we would buy games from distributors and that sort of stuff. And we would mix them all together. And we had to build a randomization, sort of algorithm for that, so that it would actually spit out like, here's the pick list that they're randomized. And then people can come in, and if you imagine, if you haven't seen this before at a convention, there's videos. If you go to boardgameboosterbox.com, you can see a video of us stacking up all the boxes at the convention. But what happens functionally, and we haven't done conventions for about a year and a half, but people come in, they go, oh, first they do this. They walk by, they go, that looks like a scam. And they just walk away. And then they come back, they see all these people opening them, and some people will open them there at the booth. They're like, oh, that's awesome. Usually what I tell people is you usually get 1 or 2 games out of the box that you really enjoy, that you take home, you like enjoy. And the other 2 you can use as gifts or, trade with friends or whatever. So it's always a good deal. Like, you're getting good stuff in there. But it's more about the discovery. That's the fun of it. And that's what we found people have really resonated to. And then, of course, for that, we donate for every box we sell. We donate to Toys for Tots as well. So that was actually the only way that we donated to Toys for Tots originally. Mm-hmm. And so we did that for many years. And then actually during the pandemic, we were like, oh, no, we can't. Like, we want to keep donating Toys for Tots. And I was basically like, we're going to keep doing that. And they're like, but we don't have any board game booster box sales to fuel that. And I said, well, what if we just donated for every sale that we made? And so that's where we donate anything we sell direct. So basically through our web store, like we do our web store through Amazon in the US. So our web store at a convention, which we weren't at any conventions, and through like our Kickstarters and pledge managers. So you'll see that little badge on our Kickstarter pages that say, hey, we donate, we raised whatever, 15,000 games or whatever it is for backers. Then we add that to there's a giving page on tabletoptycoon.com, and that sort of ticks up. So that's where we kind of expanded that commitment during the pandemic. And because we were doing well with sales and stuff, that we were able to continue that. And actually, Toys for Tots did an emergency distribution they usually only do it in the holidays, October, November, right before Christmas. And that way you can get them all out to kids for the holiday. But then they actually did an emergency distribution like April, May, right? Because all these kids were stuck at home, and these are all low-income families. They don't have money and that sort of thing. And so as somebody who was a recipient of that, when I was growing up, we got things from Toys for Tots. We got games from Toys for Tots. And we know as players of games how beneficial that is, how much that changes somebody to be able to actually play a game, right? Because they're a really good deal to begin with. They're like a really good value for the money that you get out of them. But giving somebody a game and letting them explore that game and really enjoy it, especially if they can't afford it, is a really kind of life-changing experience. And it makes a big difference to families. It's, not quite as essential as food and housing and all that stuff, but it's pretty close after that. It's like, hey, you need some engagement. You need to not be crazy when you're sitting at home. So during the pandemic, Toys for Tots did another distribution for that out of the stuff that we did. We and lots of other companies donate too. And so if you go on Toys for Tots, they have a whole bunch of sponsors. We're just one of dozens and dozens. But we want to do our little part. So that's kind of how we got other publishers involved. We said, hey, we're doing this thing. We donate games to it. Would you be willing to donate games or like sell us games for cheap so that we can keep our costs down, so we can still be a good deal for customers? And it's worked out pretty well. People have really enjoyed it. So we're going to be doing that again at Gen Con coming up. We're going to Gen Con. We'll have a limited quantity there. And then we'll have some at PAX Unplugged is another big show we do. We will not have them at Spiel and Essen because the freight on those is crazy. But we will be there, and we'll be in the same spot we were in 2019. We'll have some Everdell stuff. We now have Everdell in French and German, so we'll have the German edition there. I think we have one of the expansions now that's a collector's edition version. So yeah, that's kind of our plan. And that giving has been really essential. We feel like, we want to make money making games. Like, we are a business. We are not a nonprofit, but we can do good with every game we sell as well. And so we've kind of baked that in now to the infrastructure of the company. Like, we just work it into our budgets like anything else. It's like, yep, there's gonna be this cost, and then we need to allocate this much money to be able to buy another game to donate to kids.
That's amazing. You should be immensely proud of that. It's a phenomenal thing, and good on you for doing it. I've got to ask about the Princess Bride. In your portfolio of games, I think you've got about 250 different Princess Bride games, it seems. Are you just a massive fan of the movie? Is it as simple as that?
Yep. Yeah. I was just, so I remember there was, this is back early on when we were doing publishing, and we were talking to our sales guy at the time, and he was like, okay, if you could do, we were going to a licensing show in Vegas. And so he was like, okay, if you get any license you wanted, what would you get? And I was like, okay, well, I get the Princess Bride, and then I would get Firefly. And at the time, there were no Firefly games. And so we were like, oh, this is good. And we were actually in talks with Fox for a little bit. But we kind of bowed out of that because at the same time, there were like 5 other companies that came in and were like, hey, we'd also like to do that. We were like, ah, that's okay. But we picked up Princess Bride early. There were a couple other Princess Bride games. There's like Princess Bride Monopoly and a few other ones, and some plushes and stuff. But I was like, hey, I think we can do some different games will kind of add to this. And so we ended up doing 6 Princess Bride games, not quite 250, but 6 of them over the years. 3 of them are still in print, so we've done new editions of those, the ones that sold best. That people really seem to enjoy. So that's Battle of Wits, which is 2 to 8 players. It's that like the cup of wine game where you're poisoning other people. And at the end, you all flip over your cards and you find out who is right and who is dead. And I love that one because everybody can die, or like, I've never seen everybody live, but like everybody can die in that game. So that's fun. And that's a quick little like 10, 15 minute game. I hate to kill you. That's the dice game I mentioned earlier. That's all the duels basically. And the newest edition actually has, so we originally had all the sword fights. So it was, the Man in Black versus Inigo, and then we added in the latest one, we added Fezzik, which of course he has a rock, but Fezzik, the wrestling fight versus the Man in Black. So now there's 5 characters there. It's 7 minutes. You just roll dice, you play cards, you roll dice, and you play 7 rounds, and whoever wins, wins. That's it. You try and knock each other out, basically. And then Prepare to Die, which is more of a party game, so akin to like Apples to Apples or Cards Against Humanity. And that was one of the early ones we did. And the latest edition of that actually combines what used to be Prepare to Die, the base game, and Prepare to Die Again, which was a standalone sequel with more cards. And now we just put them all together in what I call the Goldman edition, which is a tribute to William Goldman, who's the author of Princess Bride. So we've renewed that license, I think, 3 times now. And it's not a huge license, but it's very near to my heart. So that's one that we have a lot of fun with. And we also did an Inconceivable pack that is specifically not a game. And so it's 7 cards, and you can, if you don't want to, the idea is if you don't want to do something, you can just say inconceivable, and you throw the card down. And it's all the instances in the movie, but let's say there's like 5 instances where he says inconceivable, and then there's one card that says, I do not think it means what you think it means. And the idea is if they, let's say you want to play a different game, you're like, oh, I don't want to play a game, that's inconceivable. We wouldn't pick Alien Frontiers, inconceivable. But if you flip the, oh, I do not think it means what you think it means, then you have to stick with whatever choice it was. So that was not really a game, more of a activity or something. You're arguing about where to go to dinner or whatever. So that was one little side product we made. But yeah, not quite 250, but a lot of Princess Bride games, and they still do fairly well. And worked with lots of different designers on those and different artists that made really good outputs to those. So
amazing! It's a great way to keep such an awesome movie alive with a new audience. So I'm so glad you do.
I still watch it every year on my birthday. That's my birthday movie. Or maybe I changed that. We do like all these like holiday movies, and I might have changed it to Father's Day. I forget if I changed it because I might have had to move Hamilton to like my birthday movie day, but there's lots of options there. But Princess Bride is a classic. So for people who have not seen it for some reason, I think it's on Netflix now. It's on one of the streaming channels. Oh no, Disney Plus. It's on Disney Plus. So
yeah, that makes sense. It's a fantastic film. I grew up watching that, so yeah, having played this game many times, I've had a lot of fun, and just the connections with it. It's beautifully done. I've got to ask before I let you go. Obviously, you've got a lot of stuff coming out around the Everdell world, as you talked about. What are the next few projects coming out from you outside of what we've covered?
Sure. So outside of that stuff, we've got remasters of a bunch of titles in the Victory Point Games line. So those are going to be just new additions. They'll have some new art. They'll have new components, better quality stuff. So this is a lot of the historical games, stuff like Empires in America, stuff like that was from the Victory Point line, but we wanted to upgrade that. And that project was a bit delayed during the pandemic, but we're back into that now. So you'll probably see a big, like, here's a few of those that come out, another few of those that come out, et cetera. On the Sparkworks side, on the lighter games, we've got a few titles coming out. I don't have anything to announce right now, but we do have a few that are in the works, and those will be lighter and some great fun themes that are very off the wall. Flying Meeple, I think we have a new card game coming out from Philip Dewberry and his daughter Isabel. So that'll be a fun one that we'll be revealing, I think, in September, I want to say. And then we've got, just going through the brands in my brain, and then we've got a couple of new ones for Starling, but I think those are going to be after Everdell stuff. So there's some new sort of like totally new, different stuff. And then of course we'll have probably once a year or so is what we're aiming for, to have something new for Everdell. It might just be, a small thing, or it might be a big, whole new game. The production cycle on those and the development cycle is a little longer. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to have something for Alien Frontiers, a new thing for Alien Frontiers. So if you like Alien Frontiers, there's a new thing we have not yet announced that'll be coming up. So that line continues even after 11 years. So you can subscribe to our newsletter. That's the best way to find out about all that stuff. It's just tabletoptycoon.com. And on the bottom, there's a little newsletter. Sign up through MailChimp. So that's probably the easiest way to keep up. But yeah, you'll start seeing more. We're going to do tighter announcement windows. That's one of the lessons we kind of learned during this time, is that a lot of people have had long delays, and they're not necessarily anybody's particular fault, but shipping delays or whatever. So we're actually kind of testing out doing limited launches that'll be more like, hey, we're going to bring a small quantity of those in so that they're in-house, in stock, and probably just in the US to start. And then it'll be like, hey, we'll make these available, and then we'll kind of see what happens from there. So that'll be kind of a even before a Kickstarter campaign. And some of those might never have a Kickstarter campaign. It might just be, hey, we do a limited run, it's available, and that's it. So that's a new methodology we're testing out. So the timeline between like announcement and like when you can buy it might be like a month or two. And then the timeline from when you can buy it to when you get it might be another month or two. So a much shorter window than the typical thing that we've run into in the past for a lot of things. Kickstarter is a year and a half, 2 years, so it can be a long time. So we're experimenting with different ways to address that and release things differently. But yeah, definitely stay tuned. We'll have more exciting stuff coming up. And then hopefully next year in 2022, we're kind of recover from that backlog, and then we can start doing on a more even pace, another few games a year or so.
Fantastic. Well, a lot of exciting things to come. Dan, we'll get to meet in person at Spiel later this year. I won't be coming to any American shows, but I'll definitely be there, and I'll come over to the stand and say hello. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really appreciated it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. I really appreciate it, Jim, and you have a great evening.